This will be a hopefully brief video, just sort of trying to get at this idea of what we're supposed to be doing here in the body. This is according to the Master's Research Report guidelines here. Um, it's funny. The more I spend time with this document, the more uh, I'm glad we're taking some time to clarify it. Just for a moment, I know this is sort of off topic, but notice here how much time is spent discussing the preparation of tables and figures versus what actually goes into the body of this of your master's research report. So that's, you know, disproportionate, but also look at here in the results and discussion section. That's where you're supposed to include your tables and figures and charts. So, evidently, or maybe tables and figures aren't even supposed to go in the body yet. They're gone on at great length here. I'm not exactly sure. Um, I'm just going off of what this says. Like I said, I've not seen very many completed master's research reports yet, so we're going to go with what we sort of see here. Um, as for what we see in terms of the body, um, this is a section of your um, master's research report that includes as we talked about previously, discussion of the research completed. That's very, very broad. But thankfully, we have a little bit of guidance here. It should include the work done, again, almost equally broad, topic explored, experiment completed, and procedures explored as related to the research report. And then all we have here is basically formatting. So, based off this little highlighted section, I put together some just some outline of stuff in case you're wondering what actually goes into this, what could go into this section. I'm not saying these things have to, but this is how I began to make sense of what might constitute the body section or chapter, however you're going to order your report. Because later we have results and discussion and we have conclusions and summary. So, because these are separate sort of parts of your master's research report, we're not going to be doing these things here in what is this separate part called the body. We'll save our results and discussion and our conclusions and summary for later. Um, for now, in the body, the research completed, the way that that hits my ear, it sounds something like a review of the literature or a lit review. This document, the master's research report, as far as I can tell, doesn't really call for this. So let's not necessarily call it a literature review or a review of literature. Maybe we're contextualizing the study, or maybe we're helping situate the reader. But basically, we're going to sort of overview the research that we completed. Um, and what this will do is it'll demonstrate, I wrote here, will demonstrate aptitude of the scholarly or professional conversations or discourse or again scholarship that's related to the research topic or problem that you're pursuing. And hopefully this will help or lend to establishing a useful frame or lens for discussing and interpreting the results later on, as we just showed over here later down. So, for this body part of your master's research report, you can begin by um, this is coming on the heels of your introduction, by the way. So the reader will already have some information of what you're up to. But here you're going to slow down a little bit and talk about some of the research that you've done. Briefly state a purpose. Something like this section examines the scholarship or studies or research related to um, and that you'll fill that in with what your specific aim is in your report. Um, and you'll briefly just touch on the things that you're going to cover in this part of it, in this quote unquote lit review. Um, because what comes next here is where you actually begin to lay things out. So after you introduce it, a paragraph or so would probably suffice for this. I'm guessing you don't need to go on and on, but just again, this is to help orient and situate your reader um, for discussion of your research so that they can be on the same page with you as you begin to discuss your findings and conclusion later on in the report. When you begin to talk about your research, it'd probably be helpful to find some way to organize it. Um, you can, this is totally up to you. You can organize your research by a sort of theme, if you noticed one. Hopefully you did. It's some sort of theme, not just random research. Maybe you have research that, you know, that you found informs a more meaningful point of view or more agreeable point of view or a resolution of some sort, a way forward with whatever respect to your problem is. Maybe you have maybe you encountered research that was sort of contrary to what in your mind is the solution or the remedy or the way forward. You can uh, um, the approach. Sometimes we take a look at we begin to categorize our literature, the research that we do, in terms of how the authors or the articles or books or whatever we're encountering, how they're approaching the problem, their particular stances. There's just try to come up with theme. Here's try not to do this, for example, just in terms of chronological order. That's not exactly as useful or meaningful. Same thing with if you were to just begin to summarize. I thought it would be interesting that if you've been keeping up with your annotated bibliography, that might come into use here, whether you were augmenting your annotated bibliography with rhetorical précis or not. Hopefully, somewhere in there, you do things like try and articulate the argument or the point of view of the source in question. That might go a long way to helping you categorize by theme or approach or stance. And the reason why is because each of these sections that you categorize here, you can sort of treat it as a little argument, a little mini argument that, here's this one group of research that, um, you know, these five authors tend to do this thing, tend to agree on this point, or tend to marshal this stance, or whatever it happens to be. You can sort of talk about this. This isn't just a um, you know, plopping down summaries onto a page. You're going to try and um, move your reader through your review of the literature, why and how it's relating to your topic and your problem and the specific focus of your report. Make those meaningful connections for your reader so that they're exactly crystal clear on why these sources that you're bringing up are relevant. Why are they meaningful to what you're doing? Um, all this should be done, of course, with a sort of research gap in mind. Um, this is something that might have been laid out in the introduction or elsewhere, but you want to revisit this idea from time to time because this is going to hopefully be part of your argument. That you are conducting this research and you're embarking on this project because you recognize that there is an unresolved problem or that there is a deficit in scholarship or in research, and that you are you're crafting this report in an effort to help address that gap or that deficit in knowledge. And so this is where you make some statements about that. What is this? Okay, so we have the research coming on the heels of the introduction. We know that this is going to slow down and go over some of the literature and some of the scholarship that you've engaged and do that by category somehow, moving your reader through meaningfully, connecting it to your project. And then here you can explicitly state what those connections are, what the point and purpose of the research that you conducted is. This gets over here a little bit to topics explored, I think. Maybe addresses in part this work done. Uh, but now, we still have this experiment completed over here, procedures explored. Um, that's going to be the sort of next part of this body part of your master's research report. By the way, this I don't know. It's hard to tell. Me coming from the humanities, when I see stuff like this, I want a 20-page literature review. So I'm confident it's going to not be 20 pages. Um, Depending on how many sources you have, I could see this being something like around 3 pages, maybe. Um, it doesn't take much to make an effective review of literature. And if you've got, I don't know how many sources you all are using because um, I just don't. And unless you're using hundreds and hundreds of sources, this probably doesn't need to be terribly long. So you could probably get it done in around 3 pages or so. If you find yourself doing 10 or 15 pages, you might want to let's meet up and talk about it. And if you find yourself thinking you're getting away with this part in a half a page, this entire part, we'll talk about that too. But I don't know, aim for around 3 pages, see how that feels. This part, once again, this methodology, these are all sort of traditional ways of talking about what I think this body section is asking for. Um, I don't know. Maybe this is problematic somehow. Maybe this is not meant to be a true method section. So, we don't have to call it that. We don't even have to do exactly everything you're supposed to do in a method section or a methodology section. But I think some of it is important to any project like this master's research report or what I'm learning is supposed to be this master's research report. Again, this is to basically explain how the research was conducted, how you did the thing that you did. And the reason this is important is because people who read this want to be able to see and know um, clearly what you're up to. The very technical and very sort of the spirit of it, I think, goes to that another researcher could replicate your work. This comes from a lot of the sciences, and it's important. I'm not sure how exactly the spirit of that should apply to this document we're creating for these purposes for this class. Um, I'm not sure that this needs to be utterly exhaustive, in other words. But I do think that your reader, that the more clear they are on, the clearer they are on how you did your research, it's all the better. It helps situate them more effectively, and it helps them, again, be able to grasp what you're going to be discussing in your later chapters in the discussion, results and findings and conclusion. So what does this look like? Again, we'll briefly introduce this part by restating your research. So after this is coming on the heels of both the introduction and this sort of quasi-lit review. After doing that, let's restate the question so we can recenter and refocus everything. Um, and in the context of that research question, we'll provide this sort of brief overview. This study or my research or this project, um, it relied on or employed or utilized or whatever verb you want to use, um, your particular method or methods, if you use more than one, in order to what? In order to sort of help get at this question, in order to effectively and meaningfully and usefully and explore, investigate, interrogate, whatever your specific project happens to be. So you're basically now pivoting. You're transitioning from here's all the research to now here's how this research comes to bear on my research question. And with that in mind, here's sort of what I did with all that information. I think it's important to just mention you want to gloss your method or methods. And again, this depends on what particular method you're actually using, qualitative, quantitative. Um, Mixed methods is increasingly popular because you know, you get to do more things with more methods and look at your data different ways. It just depends on what you do here. But you want to briefly describe it. You want to sort of justify or provide a rationale for whatever method or methods you have employed. I mean, unless you're using just a legion of methods, which I wouldn't recommend. I don't think that that's necessary or viable. Um, but this probably is not going to take more than a page. Um, your data sources. This is going to vary wildly depending on the actual specifics of your project. Um, one of my more recent research projects, I studied student writing. That was my data. That's what all the substantive chapters of my analysis were rooted in studying student writing. So that's what I would have put here. If you're using statistics or if you're using interviews or um, whatever you happen to be studying as your data, that's what you'll want to discuss and describe here. And you'll want to discuss it and describe it in the context of what you've set up already beforehand here. Um, as part of that, you'll want to mention how you came about your data. Again, each of these sections, I'm not envisioning them being more than a page. In some cases like this, the data collection procedures, if you have a relatively simple data collection procedure and you didn't have, all these ethical things and IRB, it's probably going to be very brief. So don't belabor any of these sections. Just because I have these here, this is mostly for me to remember to mention to you. I don't anticipate these sections being very long, these little portions here. Um, the analysis procedures, this one could be mm, comparatively lengthy, at least compared to these sections, because you're going to explain how your data were treated. Did you use coding? Are you just interpreting them? Are you just bouncing them off of sources that you found? What are you actually doing with whatever data you're working with? Are you just presenting scholarship and discussing it from your own point of view? I mean, what are you actually doing with whatever you're calling your data? This is probably going to be a useful and meaningful manifestation of whatever method or methods you employed. So keep that in mind. You'll want to be reminding your reader of exactly what you're up to, all these steps along the way. Um, if you think there are any limitations to your study worth mentioning, that's always a good thing. It's a good um, it it appeals to your reader's sense of ethos. It makes you come across as um, trustworthy and proceeding with goodwill. Um, so you can discuss that here if you want to. Um, I put 3 to 5 pages here. 5 pages seems kind of high. The more I think about this, the more I talk about it. I think if you came across with a couple, 2 or 3 pages, that would seem reasonable. Again, if you're at 10, 15, 20 pages on this part, it may be a lot, maybe a bit much. Um, Try to aim for around this, maybe the three, and we'll see what it looks like when you come up with it. Okay. I think this little sort of outline, I think it addresses a lot of what's going on here in this highlighted area of the guidelines. If you think that other things belong in here, or maybe some of this doesn't belong here, let me know. We'll talk about it. I'm, uh, I'm trying to come to terms with this the best I can, just the same as you all are. So, um, we'll see. Okay.